Hi, my name is LaRhonda Julien. Welcome to the IEEE Women in Engineering podcast. We rise together, charting pathways to STEM careers, where we share leadership insights, career advancement strategies, and innovative technology topics. Our guest today is Wendy Anderson-Cocke. Wendy is a chemical engineer by training, a wife, a mother, an author, an entrepreneur, and a taxi driver, Wendy. Her company, Engineering Leadership Solutions, strengthens organizations through the development of people, processes, and best practices. It provides practical leadership for technical organizations. Wendy, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome. We are excited to have you. IEEE's core values include growth and nurturing and partnership. Through growth and nurturing, they are helping encourage education as a fundamental activity of engineers, scientists, and technologists at all levels and at all times, ensuring that there's a pipeline of students to preserve the engineering profession. Through partnership, they promote a culture of respect for the employees and the volunteers, valuing everybody's contributions at all levels of the organization, investing in training and development to enhance capabilities, empowering individuals to make a positive difference, and building a membership organization based on a strong volunteer staff partnership to serve the profession. One of IEEE's goals is to empower technology professionals in their careers through ongoing education, mentoring, networking, and lifelong engagement. Wendy, the work that you are doing supports these goals and values, and your professional advice on this podcast is going to be a benefit to our now over 533,000 members. Wow.
Wow.
Wendy, can you explain a little bit about your journey from employee to entrepreneur? And what best practices or advice do you have for our listeners who may be contemplating a similar move?
Absolutely. And I'll make sure I address that taxi driver portion that you put in my bio as well as we get there. So those of you listening along thinking, how is she also a taxi driver? We'll make sure we get into that as well. So as you said, I started as an engineer. I still consider myself an engineer, even though what I do maybe looks less like the traditional engineering than it used to. But I'm a firm believer in once an engineer, always an engineer. We cannot turn that part of our brain off. So I spent 22 years in engineering doing product development and supply chain and manufacturing and strategy. And then what should have been the darkest day of my career in 2022, the day that I got the phone call that said that not only my job, but half of my team, my boss, and the president of my sector were all being let go. Huge corporate restructure. Should have been, like I said, the darkest day in my career. But instead, without knowing it, it had been a day I had been preparing for my entire career. Because I had always approached work in a way where I thought I was the product I was selling, regardless of what company I was working for. They were simply the buyers of my product at that moment. And I had been building a career that was easily then transferable into something else. I didn't know what. I actually call this stage my first retirement because I have retired from the corporate world. I don't know what my second retirement will look like, but in this stage, I get to do all the things I love, and I've been able to shed a lot of the things that I didn't love. But that move would not have been possible had I not spent 22 years building my brand and building my product. That's actually where, as you and I connected, my second book, Reimagine Your Work, Managing Your Career Like It's Your Business, that is the basis. I asked my readers to think of themselves as a product. What are you doing to invest in your own R&D? What is your strategic plan? Who's on your board of directors? These were questions I'd been asking myself my entire career. As a matter of fact, I went part-time when my oldest, who's now about to drive, was an infant. And for me, that allowed me to take on an additional part of the role of mother that I wanted to do. And if you asked 5-year-old me what she wanted to be when she grew up, she would have said taxi driver, just like her mom. Now, my mom in the 1900s was not, in fact, a taxi driver, but she did drive a lot of children places. And that was the big joke, is that she ran a business and was also a taxi driver. And that is the phase I am in right now. I have 2 kids, one who's 12 and one who's 15. Man, they have a lot of plans and no transportation. And this phase of my career allows me to continue to invest in myself and my profession, but also be there for them and drive them to all the places they want to be.
That's an amazing story, Wendy. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You talk about your second career. You have opened a business and you have authored 2 books. One of them you spoke about, Reimagine Your Work. The other is Making Flex Work. In Making Flex Work, you talk about using simple engineering principles and some psychology. This book, Making Flex Work, is where you want to go using the 4-step evaluation method. It talks about proactively managing your presence to build your personal brand, which you also mentioned. It talks about getting what's right for you when it comes to work-life balance and supporting flexibility in your organization. It shares that you can do that by redefining your personal boundaries, and you can work simultaneously while being the best version of yourself in the office and at home. Now, being a psychologist by degree and training myself, I am definitely interested in hearing how you were able to marry engineering and psychological principles. So, can you share a little bit about that formula and how it leads to success?
Absolutely. So, when we talk about my evaluation method, it's really 4 steps and it looks a whole lot like continuous improvement or engineering problem solving. It's E, V, A, and L. So the E is every hour counts. For our technical listeners, that is a current state analysis. For those listeners who didn't want to have to hear anything technical, just journal and understand what you're doing today. You'll be fine. The second is the V. It's valuing optimized work. It's what we as engineers were trained to do, to optimize the system, to look for where the waste is in the system and for ways to get rid of that waste. The A is assessing the expectations. Some of the research that came out of COVID, one of our COVID keepers is this research on burnout, which we were all feeling before COVID, but then people actually studied it and published on it as a part of the pandemic. And as a part of that, what we saw is a lot of the reasons people were feeling burned out was not the job responsibilities, but all the extras we had put on our plates. And so really understanding, is the work that you're doing bringing value to you or to the organization? If the answer is no to both of those, you don't need to be doing them. And if the answer is yes to the organization and no to you, then maybe you don't need to be doing them, but somebody else did. Some things serve us for a period of time in our career and then no longer serve us. And we sometimes selfishly hold on to them because they're easy or we enjoy them. And sometimes they are just left on us because nobody else wants the burden. So we have to figure out how to really assess the value of those expectations. And then L, that 4th step, is leveraging small changes. This is a Kaizen approach if you're in continuous improvement. It can be experimenting with your time if you're in the R&D world, or it can just be playing, right? It can say, how do we make small changes in a way that I don't have to ask for permission for everything I want to do? It allows me to say, is this serving me or not? So a good example I like to give on leveraging a small change is, it's about to be summer here in Atlanta and the weather's looking great and everybody wants to be outside. And we're like, whoa, I should really have worked out a little bit more over the winter, but I didn't have time. Okay, so if you're finding yourself not having time, the question I would give you is, well, when are you trying to work out? If you're trying to work out at night and you're running out of time, what if we tried to do it in the morning or at lunch? One time. Just do it once. And if you like it and it serves you, then do it again. And if it doesn't, you didn't stop and ask permission. You just did it one time. And once you decide, yes, this is working for me, now we go ask permission because we've also collected data. We've said, look, I did this and there were no repercussions, or I did this and I'm a better employee because of it. So a lot of what I ask my readers to do is to really document their time. Think of their time as data so they can understand how to do the right work from the right place at the right time so the company gets everything they want and we as an employee can still be all the places and do all the things we want to do. Now, this little psychology piece that you talked about, it has to do with managing presence. And I stumbled upon this when I was pregnant with my second child. The doctor told me that I needed to go on house arrest. She was going to put me on house arrest because I worked in a big manufacturing or big office building, and I was spending a lot of time walking. Right? I was centrally located in the building, and the bathrooms were nowhere near me. And as I got closer and closer to full term, I spent a lot more time walking back and forth down those halls to the bathroom. And as a part of that, I was shooting my blood pressure up. And she said, so here's the deal. I'm not going to tell you need bed rest, but you cannot go back to the office because the office is going to create a blood pressure issue for you. So I'm going to put you on house arrest. I said, okay, got it. I can work from home. Now this is not a time when we were able to just work from anywhere. This was between 2010 and 2013. Internet was available everywhere, but you did still have to plug your computer into the wall to access it. Right? So we're plugging into our Ethernet at home in order to be able to VPN in and get work. It wasn't going to be easy, but I could figure it out, right? But my boss said, if you go on house arrest, your FMLA is going to start. And you're going to lose those days with your child. And she was a very clever woman. She said, so what if we do this? What if you come in every day, but you come in much shorter hours? Because as long as you're here, I don't have to tell human resources that you are not coming to work. And so we started to experiment with it. One, so that my doctor would be okay with my blood pressure, but two, so we could figure out the plan. And what we stumbled upon is this idea that people keep a mental tally of when they see you. And when they see you, you are available. It also works in the virtual world, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in the in-person type of timing that we were in the office, if people see you before lunch, they assume you were there in the morning. And if people see you after lunch, they assume you were there in the afternoon. They assume the times they don't see you on the ends that you're in meetings or you just didn't pass each other. Because they don't have time to keep up with your schedule. But if they know they never can find you before lunch, then they don't think you work in the morning. So our idea was I would come in super late, go to lunch, leave super early, and people had no idea I wasn't working full-time in the office. Now, I was still working those extra hours on the sides, but in the middle is the part I was in the office. Over the last 15 years, I've played around with this quite a bit, and it's true. When people see your face, they get a little tick mark that says, yes, Wendy is available. She is present. And when they don't, they say no. It's the same in a virtual meeting. It's the reason I say everyone should turn their cameras on, because when I see you, it builds connection. It reinforces that you are available. If you are not turning on your camera, you have to be speaking up in the meetings, because it is not sufficient to just be a little black box with your initials. You have to make people remember that you were present. So easiest is the video. Second easiest is speaking, so they know you were in the meeting. But we started playing with time. And so presence, when you are in person, being really strategic with your time. You would not go to a business trip or to a conference without a plan. You know who else is going. You know who's going to be there. You know what the activities are. You have a schedule. If you're only going to the office one day a week or a few days a month, think of it like a business trip. Who am I having lunch with? Where is the breakfast? Don't have your meetings behind closed doors. If you're there, be present. Make sure that you're getting all those tick marks as much as you can, because people will feel like they are connected to you.
Those are super great points to make. It is absolutely one of my pet peeves when I am on a Teams or a WebEx or a Zoom or whatever your platform is, right? Fill in the blank. And you see all of the little black boxes. And when you call on that person, they don't respond. You absolutely make that tick mark in your mind. Well, were they here at all?
Right? Did they like log in and walk away?
Well, I really appreciate those things. I also, to your point, when I go to a conference or a workshop or even just a meeting that's going to be longer than an hour, I definitely make a plan for how I'm going to spend my time there. Those tips that you provided to our listeners definitely should be taken heed of and used the next time that they enter into those same environments. Now, one of the things that you mentioned, the way you flexed from when you were pregnant with your first child with work to when you were pregnant with your second child with work were different. I'm gonna go out on a limb and assume that your flex has changed yet again
Several times.
from, yes, from when you had your second child to now being an entrepreneur, or even from, hey, I've opened my business, now I want to be an author. Talk about what that even looks like, because now you're flexing yourself. You're not flexing with corporate America.
Yeah. So the thing I love to tell my audiences is it's because it's called flexible work because it is flexible. We call it a flexible work arrangement because flexible is an important word. Otherwise, we would just call it a work arrangement and then we wouldn't even have to have a word for it. It would just be the work arrangement. Flexible is the most important piece here because on any given day, what's necessary of you as an employee or me as an entrepreneur is different than the next day. We even expect machines to do different things. I spend a lot of time in manufacturing, and one machine on Monday does not look exactly the same on what it does on Tuesday. So even if we say we are the machine, we still expect those machines to be flexible, right? So we need to understand what is the most important thing for me today, and where is the right work and the right place and the right time to do that work. So when I was a mom of an infant, that was different than a mom of a toddler and an infant. And that was different than two elementary school children. That was different than two elementary school children during COVID. That was different than two, middle school, early teens. It's different now that I have these older teens. It was different in my corporate life. It is different in my entrepreneur life. And that's okay. Because once you understand that flexibility is really about time customization, then you know that on any day you can customize what you need to do. For instance, today I had a consulting client I was working with. I am working on some additional writing. I've taken some time to do this recording for this podcast. I've got a daughter who's got cheerleading tryouts this afternoon, so that changes. We've got a baseball game tonight with my son. I mean, all of those pieces have to fit together. I chose engineering because I loved puzzles, and people puzzles are my favorite. So just taking those principles and sticking them on people, to me, is so exciting. But when you really start to think about what do I need to do today and how does it work, it's really important to know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Many of us, and I've done it in my own career, so I'm not throwing shade at anybody, we just show up to work and it just hits us and we ride the wave until we clock out. And then we go home and we complain about how we got nothing done. Okay, well, what if we went into it with a plan? My manufacturing background says, let's go through the plan of the day. When the world shut down, that was at the time I had a first grader, and her favorite thing was every morning we would get into the kitchen and we would say, what is the plan of the day? And she would say, at 8 o'clock, mommy has a phone call. And at 9 o'clock, daddy has a meeting. And at 10 o'clock, if we have questions, mommy will come and help, right? Knowing what it is and what we're doing throughout the day is so critical. We plan our business, but we don't take the time to plan ourselves. And then we get real mad because the world has just bulldozed over us because everybody else is taking their priorities and we are getting what's left over. So I encourage everyone to look at their calendar and figure out what are we doing and where is that work and how is it going to fit. And every day is allowed to look different.
What that reminds me of is that transition from flex, because I'm starting a family and starting a business, to reimagining. Your second book, Reimagine Your Work, in it you say you do that by running your career like it's a small business. And you talked a little bit about that when you talked about blocking your time and the way that you show up at meetings. It also goes to talking about how you can understand and manage your personal brand, right? How you show up, how people see you, developing a career strategy. So not just showing up, going to lunch, and then going home. And then how to invest in yourself. Because when you invest in yourself, you are more able to invest in those around you. And that reminds me of that airplane thing, right? When the mask drops, put it on you first, and then go and help someone else. Talk about, in that context, because again, we're going from flexing to now reimagining things. Talk about what you describe as the traditional corporate system and why that does not work for today's professional.
Yeah, so the traditional corporate system, when I say that, I mean that we have a person who is going to work at one company forever, and that company is going to take care of them in the after of forever. And they are going to just pour it all in. They're going to move when they need to move. They are going to uproot their family when they need to uproot their family. They're going to be at the office when the office needs them regardless. That doesn't work today because that system was predicated on a primary breadwinner. And what's interesting is some of your younger listeners may not even know what that phrase means. Because when we look at our entry employees, our kind of 20 to 30 year olds, many of them were raised in a dual income family. Where when we look at our leaders, many of them were not. This concept of a trailing spouse that was something that was very normal 30 years ago in corporate America just simply doesn't exist today. Financially, most families can't handle that, right? We don't have somebody who has a leading career and a trailing career. We've got a lot of people in equal partnerships of their marriage and in their family. We also have a lot more families that have only a single adult at the top of the family, and therefore they have to play the role of all of it. Right? So the family structure has shifted inside of the house, and the corporate structure is needing to catch up with it. Because I can't just say, there's a job in Kansas City and I need you to move in a month. Well, who's doing that? Who's managing that? Where is my spouse going to get a job? Who's going through packing? We're not in a system where there is something at home that is able to move that machine forward. Right? We don't have a situation where there is one activity that a child is at. We have children who are way overscheduled, and no matter how much I try, they continue to be overscheduled in my house. So even though I'm aware of it, we're super overscheduled. It just happens because there are so many more choices available to our children than there were when you and I were children. And you can't just say, well, they're not going to be at that practice. There are implications for them not being at that practice. Sometimes financial implications of them not being picked up at the right time. And so we don't have that on our family structure. And so this traditional corporate structure simply doesn't work anymore. What it means is that as we have reimagined the way our life looks, the work part also has to be reimagined. We have to imagine a way that people can show up as their best, most productive selves so that the business can move forward, understanding that they come as whole people with entire lives with them. We don't just get a cog in a machine. We are not Charlie Chaplin in one of those old movies, right? We are whole humans and we have a lot going on. And so the traditional system is feeling that right now. We're feeling those two pieces rub against each other. That's where some of that quiet quitting happened, which was one of my least favorite things in the pandemic. Like, can't we all just be adults and have an adult conversation about boundaries? Right? But we all have to be able to have these conversations about what does work need and what does life need, and how do I build enough flexibility into both sides that everybody gets what they want.
That's brilliant, Wendy. It reminds me of the 4 P's that you talk about: product, pricing, placement, and promotion. When do you suggest, as an employee, or even if you are the spouse at home with that trailing career that you mentioned, when would you suggest that a person starts developing this framework, and how do they actually benchmark or evaluate it against another company or another peer doing the same thing?
Okay, so the short answer is you start now. Like, when you finish this podcast episode, you just go ahead and start. There's no magic. We don't start on Mondays. We don't start on the first of the month or the quarter. This is not a New Year's resolution. Just start, in 10 minutes. But what you need to do is start figuring out what knowledge gaps do you need to fill. Do you know what kind of product you are? Because if not, the pricing is irrelevant. Because if you don't know if you are a Samsung or an Apple 10 or an iPhone 16, you don't know what the pricing is, because they're different. So you have to understand your product. You also have to understand your placement. So when we think about product placement, one of the examples I give in the book is around Velveeta cheese, right? That Velveeta cheese, for some of your listeners will know, it is shelf stable and not sold with cheese. My husband did not know that. And he spent an enormous amount of time attempting to find it for me once in the grocery store. An adventure that involved having to talk to another woman who he described as, a mom. And she also didn't know, but she knew it was not stored with cheese. And they went on an adventure in that grocery store to locate it on an end cap, where they have like the discount holiday stuff and batteries. Well, that's where they found Velveeta cheese. Clearly the store didn't know where to put it either. But as a recruiter, I know that if the hiring manager tells the recruiter, I need cheese, they're going to the dairy section to locate it. And unless you are super special and that recruiter knows that the Velveeta is important, they're going to come home with some mozzarella, some Parmesan, and some American and say they were all out. Will any of these work? So you have to know where to be, where the people who are hiring you are going to find you. Because unfortunately, most recruiters are not like my husband. They will not go on the grocery store adventure looking for you. Once you know that, now we have to start figuring out, how do we make sure people know we want the jobs? That's the promotion piece. If you don't know and you can't articulate what kind of job and what value you bring, nobody else is doing it for you. In a business, we spend money on advertising and promotion. I'm not asking your readers to spend money, but they better invest their time in it, because for ourselves, time is the currency. And if you're not spending time making sure that people in your network know what you are good at and know what you want to do next, it doesn't matter if you're in the cheese aisle. They're not picking you up because they don't know your brand. And only after you have all of those is the pricing really the next piece. Because now you know what value you bring. And interestingly enough, most people don't have to go do that much research once they've done the other parts. Because along the way, figuring out the product and the placement and the promotion, they're organically getting, and what is the value that I bring. But you need to know that if you are not getting the value that you think you need or think you deserve, then you have to speak up and you have to be willing to go work for it. You have to be willing to figure out who will pay that price and what is the trade-off. Because let me be very clear, extra money does not just fall out of trees, maybe at your house, but not at mine. It does not just rain money at my house or in any business I've ever worked at. So you have to make enough value that they're willing to pay the premium for you.
Wendy, I love this grocery store story. And I can absolutely tell you that I am never going to look at Velveeta cheese the same way again. So thank you for adding that to my life. One of the things that you mentioned is quiet quitting. We've heard that phrase, that term a lot since COVID. In what I think is this work revolution, are there two questions to this? Any other words or phrases that you think have been overused or lost their meaning? And then tying it back to the 4 Ps, any that we shouldn't be using when we are developing our framework, our product, pricing, placement, and promotion?
So the first one we overuse is hybrid work. We have taken the word hybrid and turned it into anything that is not a traditional 9 to 5. And maybe that's true, but we use hybrid and flexible interchangeably. And that is just not a fair use of the word. Hybrid could be very inflexible. And the fact that we talk about we want a hybrid schedule, well, does that mean that I go into work Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday? Always? And never on Fridays and Mondays? Well, that's a hybrid schedule, but it sure isn't flexible. So have you gained what you actually thought you were gaining when what you really need is now a doctor's appointment on Friday and your boss says, no, 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 or on Thursday and your doctor says, no, 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 I'm sorry, you have to be at the office on Thursday. Reschedule that to Friday. I have a friend who their organization in their return to office went hybrid, right? They were hybrid. It was Wednesdays plus 1. That was the hybrid solution. Wednesdays plus 1. So you had to be in the office 2 days a week. Everybody was there on Wednesday. First of all, they did not have enough desks for everybody to all show up on Wednesday. So that became problematic. But then when you picked your plus 1, my friend picked Thursdays. Excellent. But after a few weeks, he realized that Thursday was not actually a good plus 1 for him. Tuesday would make more sense. But Thursday was his day. So he was in fact working a hybrid schedule, but it was one that did not work for him or the organization. So now he goes to work 3 days a week because he also goes on Tuesdays because that's when it makes the most sense for him to be there. Yet he has not been able to shed the Thursday because that was his commitment. So when we think about overuse of hybrid and flexible, I think we have to just be very careful to say what we mean because we're taking the value of flexibility away by just rolling it in with the word hybrid. The other one that I think we have stopped using, but we still embody it, is Zoom fatigue. So if you remember, we said Zoom fatigue a long time ago. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, I cannot stand to see myself on camera all day. It was a very 2021 thing to say. But now I hear people saying, well, I just don't have time to be on camera. Or it doesn't make sense for me to be on camera. Or, oh, we have so many meetings on top of each other, priorities. How am I going to get all the work done? And we have overbooked ourselves to a point that we are not being fully present. Because we have gotten rid of the fact that we need to get everybody into one room, so we have not built in a buffer for travel time. We have not built in a buffer for people to go fill up their water or empty their fluids. We have not built in a buffer for typing up the meeting notes from the last one or finishing the conversation because we're just hanging up and jumping into something else. And what is happening is people are not paying attention. They are simply bouncing from one activity to the other, and therefore they're not getting maximizing the work in any of those activities. We turn on the AI note reader, which is my biggest pet peeve. Yours is the little black boxes. Mine is the AI note reader. The note taker. Nobody's reading those notes later. Let's be real honest. All you've done when you say, can I record or can I use my AI note taker, is say, I don't think this meeting is important enough for me to pay attention, but I want a record of it later just in case. Right? Because you're only going back to it as a gotcha. Or when you're like, oh crap, I missed something. And we know this because, as you mentioned earlier, we say their name and they're not prepared to answer. And they were not prepared to answer because they are following up on the meeting they were just in, or they are preparing for the one they're about to go into. And although they are logged into our meeting, they are not present.
Wendy, your website hosts a wealth of very helpful, very valuable resources. And as we have had our conversation, it reminds me of so many things that I saw when I looked through there. There's probably 12, 15 different items, and I'm just gonna cover two or three here, but I definitely encourage everybody to go and take a look.
And it's all free. I do not charge for any of these resources. Let's just be
That
real
is
clear. They
correct.
are all free because when you are struggling at work, the last thing you need is to pay $5 to get something. Just go get the resource.
That is correct. And they were quick and easy downloads as well. You didn't have to put your email address
No,
in and all that good
they're just
stuff.
yours. Just take them and use them.
Yes.
Take them and use them.
One of the things that you just talked about being present and being intentional and things of that nature, it reminds me of your schedule optimization tool. Let's outline how we're spending our time, right? Let's make space for those things that matter. I'm going to ask you this very fully loaded question. How do you, especially if you are a person such as myself and probably you too, how do you combat always being on at work and at home and the guilt that you kind of feel as you start to adapt some of these flex work ideas and reimagining your work ideas?
Excellent. So I will start with the fact that my mother-in-law says I have two speeds, go and sleep. So that's how I manage being on all the time, poorly. Let's just be real honest. I manage it poorly. But sleep is important to me, and it is my favorite hobby. So maybe I'm still investing in myself when I nap. When I think about schedule optimization and then guilt and boundaries, I think specifically for women, and I know that is a large part of your audience, we feel guilt in a way that is just in our bones. We feel guilty when we are somewhere instead of somewhere else. We feel guilty when we are there and thinking about something else. We feel guilty when somebody sends us a text and we don't respond right away. We have got guilt nailed. At least I have. That is the reason I ended up going part-time early in my son's life, is I had guilt for everything. I felt like I was not being a good mother. I felt like I was not being a good spouse. I felt like I was not being a good employee. I was definitely not being a good friend. And myself, I didn't even make the list, right? Like, good to myself did not even make the top 5. Now, in retrospect, and I know because when I wrote Making Flex Work, I went and asked those people, and they all gave me a solid B. They said at that stage, you would have gotten a B, B plus. Well, I'm a really high achiever, and that to me might as well have been an F. It was not enough for me. When I show up, I want to show up as an A plus. And what I found is by spreading myself so thin, I wasn't able to be an A plus anywhere. But instead, when you start setting boundaries with people and resetting the expectations, then when you are there, you can be an A plus. So for me, 15 years ago, I had to trade 20% of my salary. Well, we didn't have the technology that we have today. I recommend very few people trade 20% of their salary today because there are so many flexible options that allow you to continue to take the full-time job, right? But sometimes that might be what you need to do. And if that's okay with you financially, then give up the vacation and the money and be where you need to be present and to feel like you can feel successful. But we typically want to do a good job. Humans, there's our psychology piece, right? Humans don't generally wake up in the morning and think, I want to suck at this today. That is not the goal when we wake up. Like, how poorly can we do? So we want to do a good job. What we need to do then is set ourselves up so that we can do a good job. Because that's the intentionality portion. So all of this with the guilt is about being intentional and being communicative. having a conversation with the person on the other side about what is realistic for you. Having a conversation about this is what I need and how what I need is going to get you what you need. One of those free tools is a business case tool where you can go and say, here is what my schedule looks like, and here's how I think the business will benefit from my schedule. I see a lot of professionals who, when they become intentional with their time and start to set these boundaries, they don't need to feel guilt because they actually outperform their previous self. I got promoted more and faster part-time than I did in the decade full-time. Because when I was there, I was on. And people didn't know what I was willing to do to make it work. But I knew what I was willing to do to make it work. And I think that's where some of the guilt comes in, is that we don't want to have that conversation because we don't want to pre-disappoint somebody. But by not having the conversation, then what we do is we disappoint ourselves. So understanding what are we going to do and what do we need is really important. But it's guilt every day, right? It's what is the most important. I also tell people, be very, give yourself a lot of grace. If I look at any 20 minutes in anybody's schedule, we're not in balance. I can't do every part of my life in 20 minutes. I have to back up. Maybe I'm not in balance on the day. Maybe it takes me my lens to be a week or a month to feel balance. But zoom out far enough until you're like, oh, my life is in balance. But on Monday, maybe it's work heavy, and on Tuesday, it's kid heavy. And on Wednesday, it is IEEE heavy. And on Thursday, I get a little bit of all of them, and I feel really wonky and out of balance. But that's okay. That's what Thursday looks like. Zoom out so it all feels like it's in balance. I come from a very Southern family, and in my house, my grandmother used to ask, how do you boil a frog? And you smiled because you've heard it. And some of your listeners are not from very Southern families, and they're like, why in the heck would anybody ever boil a frog? And the answer is, I have no idea. But the answer to how do you boil a frog is very slowly. Right? You boil it very slowly so it doesn't jump out. It took you a period of time to get to whatever work arrangement you have today. To wherever you are in your career, whatever agreements you have made in your life, it took you a while. So don't think this is a light switch that we're just going to change at the end of this podcast. Right? It's going to take you time to slowly evolve into what you want. But now we're going to have a vision and an intention when we're doing it. So that when we are the boiled frog, we're very happy. We're enjoying our hot tub, not trying to jump out.
We definitely could go so much longer just talking about those different Southern quips. What I do want to touch on, because you mentioned your friends, you mentioned your mother, you mentioned your grandmother and your husband. There are so many what I would consider non-traditional stakeholders that are a part of our career trajectory. Where else might you advise our listeners to take another look for a stakeholder, and also referring to your stakeholder map that they can use to do that, where they can evaluate their influence and interest and work to propel those different places in their career?
Yeah, so I like to think of it as a board of directors, right? So there's a whole bunch of people that sit on a corporate board of directors. So typically you would have your industry insiders, right? So those would be people that work in an adjacent industry, and they help to advise your organization on like, where is the industry going? What are the trends? So think about your other friends in IEEE, or your friends that work in other companies similar to yours. They're the ones that can tell you, oh no, that is not how it is done everywhere, right? A board also usually has people that work at the organization, right? So you've got what I call your corporate insiders. They're the ones that can be like, no, you want to go work for that guy. That guy is who propels careers. Or you don't want to work on that team because they just got this project and it is not going to go well. Or, you know what, this particular organization's been in a lot of turmoil. Your corporate insiders. So who are the people that you have built relationships with at work who can help you understand the landmines inside of your organization? You also want to think about your mentors, your sponsor if you have one or more. These are the people that can help speak truth into you because they know you at a more intimate level. And then, as you mentioned, we're not a real company. We are an actual human. So we need our family. For me, we call our family the Rolling Circus. We have 2 houses next to each other. It is 6 people. It is myself, my husband, my 2 children, my mother, and my 97-year-old grandmother. When we go out, it's a party, right? And we go out every Friday night. And when my mom moved next door with my grandmother, my boss said to me, "You just became exponentially more difficult to relocate." And I said, "Yes, sir, I did." Because now you got to sell 2 houses. And now you got to move all these people and all the doctor's appointments and all of it. When my mom moved in next door, it was actually to help us with small children. But now the children have grown, and 11 years later, the children and I are helping her with my grandmother with dementia. All of those people would be impacted in any career decision I make, so they have to be a part of the board of directors. And then I also say, if you look at everybody who's on that board, and there's nobody that looks like you need to find someone who has the same lived experience and goes through the world experiencing the same sorts of things that you experience. Because it is not good enough for someone to tell you what their experience is if they can't tell you how it's going to play out for you. So if nobody else on your board looks like you and has the same sort of life experiences, put somebody on that board just for one reason and one reason only, and for them to say, because this is how it's going to happen when you do it, because I just did it and it did not go well. Everybody can have great intentions, but if they don't understand, then it can't help you, right? I have been blessed with a herd of very incredible male mentors in my life. But none of them could tell me what it was like to be a 5-foot-tall woman in a boardroom. None of them could answer the question, what's the impact if I stand up on stage in black versus navy? But someone on my board of directors could. Because she knew that if I needed to have a bigger presence, I needed a black color on. And if I was already the biggest presence in the room, navy tones it down. That's something that only one person would have been able to tell me, and she was on my board for that reason.
Wendy, another reference again to you as a mother, your grandmother. Before we end this episode, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to you. Happy Mother's Day to your mother. Happy Mother's Day to your sweet grandmother. And Happy Mother's Day to all of our listeners and anyone who has it in their heart but hasn't been blessed yet with a mother. And then I want to transition really quickly. What is the next thing that you are reimagining?
Oh, we are in a lot of change in my family, right? We're about to have a driver in my house, so that's going to change balance all over again. And I am currently, I told you at the beginning that today, part of what I did today was do some writing. So I am working on book number 3. It is going to be around how do we lead ourselves and lead others through this journey in our career. It doesn't have a title, it doesn't have a date, but it's got about 10,000 words so far, so it's getting there. So that is kind of the next big thing for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We will definitely be looking forward to that. You also have a weekly community conference call and a monthly newsletter. Can you share with our listeners how they can sign up for those free resources too?
Absolutely. So if you go to engineeringleadershipsolutions.com, that's the business, or reimagineyourwork.com, that's the second book, or makingflexwork.com, that's the first book. They all send you to the exact same website because I'm a one-woman show and I cannot manage 3 websites. That's another part of balance, right? So they're all going to point you to the same place. And right there on the home screen, there is a spot that says sign up for the newsletter. And then there's a link to say sign up for the Friday calls. The Friday calls, they're not a workshop. They're not a mastermind. They are not a training class. It is totally organic. When you fill out the form and it says, what questions do you have? You can put 1, you can put a bunch, you can put none. and it is real-time Q&A with whoever's there and whatever's on their mind. So I allow everybody to come on. We introduce each other and ourselves, and we say, here are the questions that came in. I give some answers. Everybody's feel free to chime in, build some network while they're there as well. And you get the Zoom link once you register. So I look forward to having some of your listeners join us and hear what's on their mind.
Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on IEEE's Women in Engineering podcast. We rise together, charting pathways to STEM careers. It has been a joy and a pleasure. We appreciate you helping us learn and the energy that you bring to everything that you do. You help us, you inspire us to lead in a more impactful way. Because, Wendy, as you know, when women rise in STEM, industries shift, power moves, and the world changes. Until next time, everybody, keep rising.